Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new, welcome. My name is Adelina and I make videos about living in my tiny house on wheels and living a more intentional life. Well, I spilled my coffee. So I made myself a cup of tea, and that's what I'll be drinking during this video. It's been a day. So it is a long weekend here in Canada and it's kind of a lazy weekend, and so I thought today what I would do is I would do a Q&A, answer some of your most asked questions. Some of these questions I have answered in other videos. I do have a lot of new followers, so I thought I would just amalgamate all the answers into a couple of Q&A videos. So this first one is going to be basically more how, why, and what's next for me and the tiny house journey. So I wrote down my questions. I'm not sure I'll get through all of them in this first video, but I'll do my very best. So the first question is, why did I want to live in a tiny house on wheels? And that is a question I get a lot. And it is a good question because it's kind of a different thing to do. So for me, I wanted to live in a tiny house on wheels because I no longer wanted to be tied to a house here in the city. I had a townhouse, a condo, and I had had a couple of special assessments since I'd started living there. Expenses just kept going up and up as far as property taxes, and like I say, condo fees had also gone up. Ooh, in the time that I lived there, the condo fees had gone up about 5 times, and so that was just getting to be too much for me. I wanted more control over my expenses, and I wanted to live a less expensive and just a simpler life. So that's why I decided that a tiny house on wheels would give me that, so that I could move it and I wouldn't have to go through the cost and hassle of selling a property and then moving and having to purchase a new property and all of those things. So if I built a tiny house on wheels, when I moved everything with it, and there was none of that on either end. So that was why I decided to build a tiny house on wheels. Question number 2, how long have I been living in my tiny house on wheels? I followed Serendipity home from the builder in Lethbridge on July 2019. So I've been living here for almost 2 years, and I've been through 2 Canadian winters in my tiny house. Third question is, how did I find my tiny house parking spot? I have a whole video, which I will link below. And if I figure out how, I'll put the little link above here for the card for it. My specific experience of finding this parking spot here in this mobile home park was, I had really thought that I wouldn't be able to find a parking spot in the city because Calgary is not very tiny house on wheels friendly. But person I knew, a friend, mentioned mobile home parks. What about a mobile home park? What about an RV park? And so I'd never considered a mobile home park, and I just started phoning around. Online, I found the real estate broker who bought and sold mobile homes. I phoned his office, and he told me that there were, he sort of explained the situation. Calgary used to have a lot more mobile home parks, but the city-owned parks have all been closed because the city wants to develop that land. But there is still a handful, I think 5 maybe, of privately owned mobile home parks in the city. And he knew of one that had vacancies, so he gave me the contact information. I phoned the office. It was over the Christmas break, and I talked to the office manager here, and she sent me a map of the park with there was 2 vacancies that showed the 2 spots, and said, you know, if you want to drive through and have a look and see what you think of that. So I actually did that day, and I stopped into the office and talked to her. I came with my blueprints with the engineer stamp on them. I came with printouts of the builder's website that showed the certification, the CSA certification that the Teacup Tiny Homes had. And I also came with some pictures of houses that were gooseneck styles, and sort of similar in idea to what I was building, so that she could have some idea of what it would look like. Because a lot of people don't know what a tiny house is. And if they do, they've seen these shows on HGTV, and they can be, there's so much variety. So I wanted them to see what I was building. So I popped in, had a great discussion. She said she would talk to the property manager in Vancouver and let me know. And the next day I got a text from her saying that they were thrilled, they would love to have me, and we started the process. So that's how I found my spot for my tiny house. So as I just mentioned, I live in a mobile home park, and I've had, as recently as yesterday, I had somebody ask me what it was like to live in the mobile home park. And valid question. I don't have a negative feeling about mobile home parks because I grew up in one in the Northwest Territories, because I grew up in a mining town and we lived in a mobile home for a good portion of it. So I grew up in a mobile home, and I've always loved small spaces. I loved our truck camper when we had it. I just love how cute and efficient a small space can be. So I've always liked mobile homes and RVs and things like that. But what is it like to live in this RV park? Awesome. The people here are really friendly. They're just normal people that you'd find anywhere. There are a lot of seniors, but there are some young families. I also see professionals. You know, there are some trailers that are really run down and are what you might imagine a trailer park would look like. Most of them are very well maintained. The people are super friendly. It feels very safe because it feels like a very small, close-knit community, and I have never, ever felt uncomfortable, unsafe. I've been very welcomed, and, you know, as you can probably imagine, the tiny house definitely drew a lot of attention when she came, and people have been super friendly. So I really like living here. It's a good place for me as a single person because there's lots of people around me, and everybody that I've met has been really friendly, and it's very well managed. There's always one cat here. Anyways, so the next question is, how long do I plan to stay here in this spot, in this city, here in general? Well, the goal was never for this to be my permanent parking spot. This was always a temporary spot. When I first moved in here, I was not a full-time teleworker. I am now. I was working from home 3 days a week. And I wasn't ready to leave the city just yet. I don't know, it just wasn't the right time because of the work situation, also because my kids were going through some, you know, challenging times in their respective lives, and I kind of wanted to be close to them as a mama. But the plan was always to move the tiny house to British Columbia, preferably to Vancouver Island, somewhere around Victoria, BC, probably not in the city because that's going to be really expensive, but somewhere up island or the interior of BC. I never planned to spend 2 Alberta winters in the tiny house here. I had really hoped that I would only be in this parking spot for a year and then I would move. But then last year happened, the pandemic happened, and it just was not going to happen that I was going to move. That was just not possible. And so I thought that maybe then this spring I would be moving, because I, like so many of us, assumed that this worldwide situation would be over by this time. But of course it's not. We're obviously coming out the other end of it, but it's still not done. And so it doesn't look like I'll be moving certainly not this spring or this summer. If I can find a spot, I would consider moving this fall. I'd really like not to spend a third Alberta winter in the tiny house. Not that she doesn't do well in the tiny house, but just because I'm done with winter. And that's one of the reasons I want to move to BC. I don't want to have all this snow and cold weather that we have here. And I don't have a garage like I had in my townhouse, so that's always a hassle. So the goal is to not spend another winter here. It could very well turn out that it will be next spring that I move the tiny. As soon as I can, as soon as travel opens up interprovincially, I am definitely going out to BC to start scouting a spot and see if I can find a place to move her. And then once I do, I will be making the arrangements like the actual logistical arrangements about how she's going to get from here to there across the Rocky Mountains. So I've answered the question about how long I plan to stay, where will I move, and when. So the next question that I get quite a bit is, will I rent a space when I move, or will I purchase land? Originally, the goal was never to own property again because I didn't want to be tied to one place. But over the last few years, I'm more and more am thinking that I would really like to buy a piece of land somewhere on the island or the interior with a water view of some sort. I think that I would prefer that. When I move, I will most likely be renting at first so that I don't have to rush to make that decision and find that property. So I'll move, I'll rent for a little while I search for a piece of property, but I would like to buy a little piece of land that has a bit of a view. And I guess at that point I'll be more off grid, and I will have to figure that out because I don't have solar on the tiny house right now. I didn't go to that expense because I didn't need it right away, but I always intended on at some point having that and a compost toilet and figuring that out. So when I move, I will likely have some form of off-grid capability, and I also plan on building a couple of smaller tiny houses. I call them bunkies, but smaller tiny houses that I will use as guest houses for when my kids and friends come to visit, and that I'll rent out on Airbnb when they're not occupied by friends and family. I think that that would be a lot of fun. I have some kind of ideas of what I'd like to do. I would love to find an old railway car and have it moved out there and convert that into a tiny house. I would love to find, an old church or something like that that's being torn down. It's one of these tiny little community ones that you see in the countryside as you're driving around, and have it reassembled on the property and make that a tiny house, and just have some really cool tiny house buildings. Some will be on wheels. Obviously, the church wouldn't be, but I think that that would be really cool, and I will, like I say, rent those out on Airbnb as vacation rentals. I think that would be a lot of fun. This is kind of a funny question, and I get it surprisingly often. Not always from the channel, but quite a bit in private life, but I have been asked it many times. What happens if I meet somebody and somebody else suddenly is in my life and moves in? Will I stay in this tiny house? Will I sell it? What will I do? It's big. It's 37 feet long, 9.5 feet wide. There's lots of room in here for 2 people. I don't think that it would be a problem for a couple to live in a tiny house. I don't know what the future brings. I don't live my life waiting for something to happen. I live my life right now. So I built my tiny house for my life right now, for me, and not for somebody else. But it's big enough definitely for 2 people, especially if you live in a climate where you can spend a lot of time outside. And I've always wanted to build a little studio so I could maybe do some art, some things like that. I definitely want a little wood shop because I do like to play around with that sort of stuff. So you know, there's no reason that 2 people couldn't live in a tiny house. I certainly have no intentions of selling this house at any point. If something should happen and I should not be able to live in the tiny house, it would definitely go to one of my kids versus being sold to someone else. But yeah, there's lots of room in here for 2 people, but I don't live my life waiting for somebody else to make it whole. I have a pretty good life as it is, and if somebody else comes in, there's lots of room for them if that should happen. Another question that I get, and I've actually thought about this myself. Will I always live in a tiny house on wheels, this one or another one that I've built? Or will I ever live in a conventional foundation house ever again? I don't know. I'm not going to say yes or no to that because I don't know. And why would I lock myself into, one or the other? I, at some point, may very well move into a foundation house. I think I will always live in a small house. In fact, what I think might happen years down the road, I might build a tiny log cabin, little A-frame log cabin with a loft in it. I think that would be really cool, and a nice stone fireplace, but it'll still be, 400 square feet. This is not going to be a big place. I don't need a lot of space. I don't want a lot of space. I don't like cleaning the house that much that I want to clean a large space. But I think a little miniature log cabin could be really cool as well. But if I have multiple tiny houses on my property, some on wheels, some not, I could just move and live in any one I wanted depending on my mood. Who knows? But yeah, it could happen. But I think I can confidently say I will never live in a large house again. I will always live small in some form because it suits me so well. Doubt I'll ever live in a large, traditional, conventional house, but there's a good chance that at some point I will live in a different style of tiny house, one that might not be on a trailer. It might be on a foundation of some sort. There's just so many things you could do. I always loved the idea of a longboat, a houseboat that you see in Europe a lot on the canals. I think that would be really cool too. Who knows? I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that small is always going to be a part of my life going forward. So that's it for this week. I think that the video is long enough. I'll just end it there. I hope you found that interesting. Again, I've answered a lot of those questions, in and out of other videos that I've done. But if you're new or you just want the concise sort of answers, this video is for you. I go into a lot more depth on a lot of topics in other videos on the channel, but I hope you liked it. I hope it answered some of your questions. If you have other questions, please put them down in the comments. I would love to answer them in a future video. And if you have any ideas for future videos, if you have some things that you'd like to know about tiny houses that maybe I haven't discussed yet, just let me know. And don't forget, on Wednesday, the video on the other channel will be up. What I'm going to do this week is just show you what my vegan skincare routine is, because a lot of people have asked for that. But that'll be on the other channel, a little bit about a lot of things. I hope you check that out too. And I will see you next week.